The chill of a New York winter bit through Maxwell Reid's tailored Armani coat as he hurried from his sleek Bentley toward the towering glass edifice of Reid Enterprises. At 53, Maxwell had amassed a fortune of $8 billion through ruthless real estate development and tech investments, transforming the Manhattan skyline in his image. Today, like every day for the past 20 years, he carried a vintage leather wallet, a reminder of humbler beginnings that now contained $50,000 in cash, a habit he maintained despite his financial advisor's protests. "Sir, your 9 a.m. with the Tokyo investors is ready in the conference room," his assistant chirped through his earpiece as Maxwell nodded to the security guards who scrambled to attention at his entrance. "Tell them I'll be there in 5. He replied curtly, his mind already calculating the potential billion-dollar merger that awaited him. What Maxwell didn't notice was the slight bump as he passed through the revolving doors, or the wallet that slipped from his coat pocket onto the polished marble floor. 10-year-old Oliver Hayes shouldn't have been in the lobby of Reid Tower. Security usually kept homeless people at least 3 blocks away from the prestigious building. But the brutal February temperatures had driven the boy to seek warmth anywhere he could find it. Clutching his tattered backpack containing everything he owned, Oliver had slipped in behind a group of executives, his small frame and quick movements making him temporarily invisible to the distracted guards. He had been living on the streets for 8 months now, ever since his mother died of pneumonia and the foster care system lost track of him. Oliver had quickly learned the harsh rules of survival: stay invisible, trust no one, and take what you need when no one is looking. So when he spotted the expensive leather wallet on the floor, his first instinct was to grab it and run. And he did grab it. But then he saw the owner's ID and the shocking amount of cash inside. $50,000, he whispered, his breath catching. It was more money than he had ever seen. Money that could buy food, warm clothes, maybe even a place to stay for months. He looked up at the name on the ID, Maxwell Reid, and at the photo of the stern-faced man. Oliver had seen that face before, on billboards and in newspapers that he sometimes used as blankets. This was the man they called the Emperor of Manhattan. Oliver's small fingers trembled around the wallet. He could disappear with this money. No one would ever find him. He could eat real food instead of dumpster scraps, sleep somewhere warm. But something stopped him, perhaps his mother's voice echoing in his mind. "Your character is what you do when no one is looking, Ollie." 3 floors up, Maxwell Reid was midway through his presentation when he patted his pocket and felt the emptiness where his wallet should have been. His face remained impassive as panic surged through him. That wallet contained not just cash, but the only photo he had of Elizabeth, his wife, who had died 15 years ago, whose memory he had sealed away along with his capacity for emotional connection. "My name is Theo Teller, and if this introduction has already sparked your curiosity, leave your like to follow the unfolding of this extraordinary journey between a street-smart child and one of the most powerful men in America." Maxwell abruptly ended the meeting with the Japanese investors, ignoring their confused expressions as he strode out of the conference room with a terse, "We'll reconvene tomorrow." His assistant Jessica hurried after him, her heels clicking rapidly on the marble floor. "Sir, is everything all right?" The Tanaka group seemed quite taken aback by, "My wallet is missing." Maxwell cut her off, his voice carefully controlled despite the storm brewing inside him. "Check security footage of the lobby immediately. No one leaves the building until it's found. Which city are you watching this from? Let us know in the comments below." Jessica's eyes widened at the unusual request. In 7 years working for Maxwell Reid, she had never seen him disturbed by something as trivial as a lost wallet. Most CEOs of his caliber didn't even carry cash. "Of course, sir. I'll alert security right away." Meanwhile, Oliver clutched the wallet tightly to his chest as he debated what to do. He had slipped into a restroom on the ground floor to escape notice, sitting in a stall with his knees pulled up so his feet wouldn't be visible beneath the door. The wallet felt heavy in his small hands, heavy with possibility, with choice. He carefully removed the cash and counted it again. $50,000. The things he could do with that money flashed through his mind. A warm hotel room, new clothes that didn't smell like someone else's life, hot meals for months. But as he started to put the money back in his pocket, a worn photograph slipped out from behind the credit cards. A beautiful woman with bright eyes and a warm smile looked back at him. She had the same slight crease around her eyes when she smiled that his own mother had had. On the back of the photo, written in faded ink, "Elizabeth, my heart, my home, 2007. Oliver's resolve faltered. This wallet wasn't just money to its owner. It contained memories, the kind Oliver himself treasured of his own mother. The few photographs he had of her were his most prized possessions, carefully wrapped in plastic in his backpack to protect them from rain and snow. Closing his eyes, Oliver made his decision. On the executive floor, Maxwell paced his office while security teams reviewed footage. The wallet itself could be replaced. The cash meant nothing to him. But the photographs, the one connection to a time when his life had held something beyond acquisitions and bottom lines, that was irreplaceable. The intercom on his desk buzzed. "Mr. Reid, there's a child at reception asking to see you personally. He says he has something that belongs to you." Maxwell froze mid-stride. "A child?" "Yes, sir, a young boy. He appears to be homeless, sir. Security was about to escort him out when he showed them your wallet." "Send him up, immediately," Maxwell ordered, his heart racing for the first time in years for reasons unrelated to stock prices or property values. When the elevator doors opened, Maxwell was struck by how small the boy looked. Dressed in layers of mismatched, dirty clothes, with a threadbare backpack slung over one shoulder, the child couldn't have been more than 10 years old. His face was smudged with dirt, but his eyes, bright blue and unflinching, met Maxwell's directly. "Are you Mr. Reid?" the boy asked, his voice steadier than his appearance suggested it should be. "I am," Maxwell replied, noticing how his usual intimidating presence seemed to have no effect on this child. Oliver held out the wallet. "I found this in the lobby. I thought you might want it back." Maxwell took the wallet carefully, opening it to find every dollar still there, along with his credit cards and, most importantly, Elizabeth's photograph. He looked up at the boy with new eyes, a strange sensation, something like respect, unfurling within him. The silence between them stretched as Maxwell studied the boy. Behind the dirt and ill-fitting clothes, he saw intelligence in those eyes, and something else he recognized all too well. The wary calculation of someone accustomed to weighing every risk, every opportunity for survival. "What's your name?" Maxwell finally asked, his usual commanding tone softened by genuine curiosity. "Oliver," the boy replied, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Oliver Hayes." Maxwell gestured toward a chair. "Sit down, Oliver Hayes." Oliver hesitated, glancing at the pristine white leather chair, as if afraid his dirty clothes might ruin it. Eventually, he perched on the very edge, his backpack clutched protectively in his lap. "Do you know how much money was in this wallet?" Maxwell asked, watching the boy closely. Oliver met his gaze without flinching. $50,000, sir. And yet you returned it. Every dollar." Maxwell sat down across from him. Most adults wouldn't have done that. A flicker of something, perhaps pride, crossed Oliver's face before disappearing behind his careful mask. "My mom always said that what you do when no one's watching shows who you really are." The simple statement hit Maxwell with unexpected force. Elizabeth had said almost exactly the same thing, many times, before he became obsessed with expansion, with winning, with building an empire that now felt hollow when he allowed himself to truly feel it. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman," Maxwell said quietly. "Where is she now?" Oliver's fingers tightened around his backpack straps. "She died last summer. Pneumonia." "And your father?" "Never met him," Oliver replied with a shrug that suggested he'd long ago accepted this fact. Maxwell leaned forward. "So who takes care of you now?" The boy's silence answered more clearly than words could have. The slight jut of his chin, the defiant set of his small shoulders. He was alone and determined to handle it himself. "When did you last eat, Oliver?" Maxwell asked, noticing for the first time how thin the boy's wrists were. Oliver looked away. "Yesterday, maybe." Maxwell pressed the intercom. "Jessica, order lunch for two." He looked back at Oliver. "Do you like hamburgers?" For the first time, Oliver's carefully maintained composure cracked, revealing a glimpse of the child beneath. "Yes, sir, I do." While they waited for the food, Maxwell found himself asking questions he hadn't planned. Where Oliver slept, abandoned buildings when possible, subway stations when it was too cold, how he got by, odd jobs, collecting bottles, occasional help from a sympathetic diner owner. What had happened after his mother died? A brief, miserable stint in foster care before he ran away. Each answer twisted something in Maxwell's chest, something that had been dormant for 15 years. The boy's resilience was remarkable, but it was resilience no child should need to develop. When the food arrived, Maxwell watched as Oliver struggled to eat slowly, to maintain dignity despite his obvious hunger. He recognized the same pride that had driven himself decades ago, when he'd clawed his way out of poverty through sheer determination. "Why did you return the wallet, Oliver?" Maxwell asked again, still puzzled by this act of honesty from someone who had every reason to take advantage. "You could have used that money. No one would have blamed you." Oliver swallowed his bite of hamburger and looked directly at Maxwell. "The picture," he said simply. "The lady in the photo. She looked important to you." Maxwell's breath caught. In his billion-dollar world of yes men and sycophants, this street-smart child had seen what mattered most, had recognized value beyond the cash. "She was my wife," Maxwell heard himself say, the words emerging unpracticed and raw. "She died 15 years ago." Oliver nodded with the solemn understanding of someone who had experienced similar loss. "I keep my mom's pictures in here," he said, patting his backpack. "They're the most important things I own." As the boy spoke, Maxwell noticed a deep, persistent cough that Oliver tried to suppress. The same kind of cough Elizabeth had dismissed in her final months. The same kind that had taken this boy's mother. The coughs reminded Maxwell of board meetings and quarterly reports, abandoned beside hospital beds, of promises made to Elizabeth that he would balance work and life better after just one more deal. Promises left unfulfilled as cancer claimed her while he was negotiating a property acquisition in Dubai. "That coughs," Maxwell said, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. "How long have you had it?" Oliver shrugged, embarrassed by the attention. "A while. It's nothing." Maxwell found himself making a decision that, for once, had nothing to do with profit margins or strategic advantages. "I have a proposition for you, Oliver Hayes." The boy's expression immediately turned wary, the look of someone who had learned that propositions from adults rarely favored children like him. "I'd like to have my personal physician examine you, right now. And in return," Maxwell paused, calculating his next words carefully. "In return, I'll give you a reward for returning my wallet. A proper reward." "I don't need a reward," Oliver said, his pride visible in the straightening of his small shoulders. "I just did what was right." Maxwell felt a smile tug at his lips, a genuine one, unfamiliar on his face after years of practiced corporate expressions. Integrity should be rewarded. That's good business. An hour later, Maxwell sat in the waiting area of his private doctor's office while Oliver underwent examination. Dr. Sarah Chen had been Maxwell's physician for a decade, but he'd never seen her look at him with the mixture of surprise and approval she'd shown when he arrived with Oliver in tow. As he waited, Maxwell found himself unable to focus on the emails piling up on his phone. Instead, his mind kept returning to the wallet, to the photograph, to Elizabeth's voice in his memory. "Life is measured in moments of connection, Max, not in towers with your name on them." Dr. Chen emerged from the examination room with a serious expression. "Mr. Reid, may I speak with you privately?" Maxwell followed her into her office, a sudden tightness in his chest. "How bad is it?" The boy has bronchitis that's verging on pneumonia, she said directly. He's malnourished, sleep-deprived, and has numerous minor untreated injuries. But with proper care, medicine, and rest, he can recover completely. Prescribe whatever he needs, Maxwell instructed. Cost is irrelevant. Dr. Chen studied him with new interest. Mr. Reid, forgive my bluntness, but prescriptions alone won't help. This child needs stable housing, regular meals, and ongoing care. He needs, she hesitated, a home. The word hung in the air between them. Maxwell hadn't thought of his penthouse as a home in years. It was merely where he slept when he wasn't working through the night or staying at one of his hotels. What happens to him otherwise? Maxwell asked, already knowing the answer. Back to foster care, most likely, Dr. Chen replied. Though from what he's told me about his experiences there, he'll probably run away again. Maxwell nodded, his decision crystallizing with unusual clarity. Thank you, Doctor. Please prepare the prescriptions. We'll handle the rest. When Maxwell returned to the waiting room, Oliver was sitting exactly where he'd left him, backpack clutched to his chest like a shield. The boy looked up, eyes searching Maxwell's face for clues about his fate. Good news, Maxwell said. Dr. Chen says you'll be fine with the right medicine and care. Oliver nodded cautiously. Thank you for the doctor visit, Mr. Reid. I should probably get going now. Actually, I have a problem, Oliver, Maxwell said, sitting beside him. A business problem, and I think you might be able to help me solve it. This captured the boy's attention. Me? How? I have a penthouse with several empty guest rooms. Maintaining property that sits empty is poor asset management. Maxwell spoke matter-of-factly, recognizing instinctively that charity would offend the boy's pride. I need someone to occupy one of those rooms. Temporarily, of course, while you recover. Consider it part of your reward. Oliver's eyes narrowed with suspicion, born of hard experience. Why would you want me in your home? I'm just a kid you don't know. Maxwell considered the question seriously. In his world of calculated risks and strategic partnerships, this impulsive decision defied conventional logic. Yet somehow it felt right in a way his carefully plotted business moves rarely did anymore. Because you did something extraordinary today, Oliver. You showed character, and in my experience, that's the rarest commodity in the world. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the most valuable things we gain come from unexpected connections. If you believe in the power of such moments, consider subscribing so you don't miss our next journey into the extraordinary lives that intersect in ways we never anticipate. The Reid penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a gleaming skyscraper with Maxwell's name emblazoned across its crown. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Manhattan that normally impressed even the most jaded visitors. But as the private elevator ascended, Oliver's attention was fixed not on the approaching cityscape, but on Maxwell himself. Do you live here alone? The boy asked, his voice echoing slightly in the walnut-paneled elevator. I do, Maxwell replied, realizing how strange that might sound to a child. 8,000 square feet of premium real estate occupied by a single person. My staff comes daily, but they don't live on site. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse foyer, revealing an expansive space of marble, glass, and museum-quality art. Oliver stepped out hesitantly, as though afraid his presence might somehow damage the pristine environment. This is bigger than my whole school was, he murmured, taking in the soaring ceilings and the Manhattan skyline beyond the windows. Maxwell watched the boy's reaction, seeing his own home through fresh eyes. The space that real estate magazines had featured as the ultimate bachelor billionaire's lair suddenly seemed cold, impersonal, more like a luxury hotel suite than a place where someone actually lived. Let me show you to your room, Maxwell said, leading Oliver down a hallway lined with abstract art that had been selected by a designer whose name Maxwell could no longer recall. The guest room, like everything in Maxwell's world, was immaculate and expensive. A king-sized bed with Egyptian cotton sheets, a marble bathroom with a rainforest shower, and its own terrace overlooking Central Park. Yet as Oliver placed his tattered backpack, containing everything he owned in the world, beside the custom Italian bed frame, the disparity between their lives struck Maxwell with uncomfortable force. "The bathroom's through there," Maxwell indicated, watching as Oliver's eyes widened at the sight of the deep soaking tub. "When did you last have a proper bath?" Oliver considered this. "The shelter on 38th lets you shower for 5 minutes. That was maybe 3 weeks ago. But a real bath?" He shook his head. "Not since my mom." "Well," Maxwell said, clearing his throat against a sudden tightness, "take as long as you like. There are new clothes in the dresser that should fit you." He'd had Jessica order them while Oliver was with the doctor. "We'll have dinner at 7. Left alone, Maxwell retreated to his home office and tried to focus on the work he'd abandoned that morning. The Tokyo deal was time-sensitive. His absence from the meeting had already cost him leverage, yet he found himself distracted, his thoughts returning to the small, solemn-faced boy who had upended his carefully structured day. At precisely 7, Maxwell emerged to find Oliver waiting in the hallway, freshly bathed and dressed in new clothes that finally fit his small frame. His hair, clean now, was a shade lighter than it had appeared before, sandy blonde rather than brown, and he'd made a visible attempt to comb it neatly. The transformation was striking, yet beneath the clean exterior, the wariness in his eyes remained unchanged. "You look like a different person," Maxwell observed as they walked to the dining room. "Feel like one too," Oliver admitted quietly. "Thank you for the clothes, Mr. Reid." The private chef Maxwell retained had prepared a meal that would have impressed his most discerning business associates. Yet, as they sat at opposite ends of the massive dining table, the formality of the setting seemed to highlight rather than bridge the gap between them. After watching Oliver struggle with the array of silverware, Maxwell moved his own plate to sit closer to the boy. "This table was designed for entertaining business associates," he explained, "not for two people to actually converse." Oliver seemed to relax slightly at this adjustment, though he still ate with careful restraint, despite his obvious hunger. Halfway through the meal, the boy looked up with unexpected directness. "Why are you doing all this, Mr. Reid? Really?" The question caught Maxwell off guard. In his business dealings, people rarely questioned his motives so directly, content to accept whatever explanation best suited their own interests. This child, however, demanded authenticity. "I'm not entirely sure," Maxwell admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. "Perhaps because you remind me of myself at your age." Oliver's eyebrows rose skeptically. "You were homeless?" "Not exactly, but I was poor. My father left when I was young. My mother worked 2 jobs. We lived in a neighborhood not much safer than the streets you've been sleeping on." Maxwell hadn't spoken of his childhood in decades. Those early struggles were omitted from his official biography, replaced with the sanitized narrative of a self-made entrepreneur. "So, how did you get—" Oliver gestured at their surroundings. "All this?" "Hard work, determination, some luck." Maxwell paused, "and a willingness to do whatever it took to never be powerless again." Something in his tone made Oliver study him more carefully. "Did it work? Do you feel powerful now?" The question, innocent yet profound, struck Maxwell with unexpected force. He had achieved every measure of success by conventional standards: wealth, influence, a corporate empire that spanned continents, yet power, true power, would have saved Elizabeth, would have filled this massive apartment with something more meaningful than expensive objects selected by hired decorators. "That," Maxwell said quietly, "is a very good question." 3 days passed in an uneasy rhythm as Maxwell and Oliver navigated their unlikely cohabitation. Maxwell had arranged for a tutor to assess Oliver's educational level while he recovered, and for a pediatric specialist to monitor his improving health. He'd also initiated discreet inquiries into Oliver's background, a process that would normally have taken hours, but was stretching into days due to the boy's minimal paper trail. On the fourth morning, Maxwell was surprised to find Oliver already awake and seated at the kitchen counter when he emerged for his usual pre-dawn coffee. "You're up early?" Maxwell observed, checking his watch. It was barely 5:30 a.m. "Couldn't sleep," Oliver admitted, his fingers tracing patterns on the marble countertop. "Not used to it being so quiet." Maxwell nodded in understanding. The silence of wealth was different from the silence of poverty, cushioned by expensive insulation rather than fraught with danger. He'd experienced both. "Dr. Chen says my cough is almost gone," Oliver continued, his voice carefully neutral. "I'll be better soon." The unspoken question hung between them. What happens then? Maxwell had been asking himself the same question. The temporary arrangement that had seemed so clear in the moment of decision now stretched before him with uncomfortable ambiguity. Social services had been in contact, expressing both gratitude for his intervention and thinly veiled skepticism about his motivations. A billionaire taking in a homeless child raised eyebrows, even in New York. "Oliver," Maxwell said, choosing his words with unusual care, "there's something I need to ask you about." The boy's posture immediately stiffened, his expression closing like a shutter. Maxwell recognized the look, the same defensive armor he himself had perfected in boardrooms and hostile negotiations. "My team has been researching your background," Maxwell continued, meeting Oliver's gaze directly. "Standard procedure when I'm considering a significant investment." "Investment?" Oliver repeated, confusion momentarily replacing wariness. "In people, sometimes," Maxwell clarified. "The most valuable asset class, when chosen correctly." He placed a folder on the counter between them. "Your mother's name was Caroline Hayes. She was 32 when she died. Before her illness, she worked as a paralegal at Westbrook and Sullivan. You lived in an apartment in Queens until she couldn't work anymore." Oliver nodded slowly, pain flashing across his features at the mention of his mother. "What my investigators couldn't find," Maxwell continued, "was any record of your father." I told you, I never met him," Oliver said, a defensive edge creeping into his voice. "Yes, but there's usually still a record, a birth certificate, child support documentation, something." Maxwell tapped the folder. "In your case, there's nothing. Your birth certificate lists only your mother." Oliver shrugged, but the careful blankness of his expression told Maxwell he was treading on sensitive ground. "Did your mother ever talk about him?" "Sometimes," Oliver admitted after a long pause. "When she'd had a bad day or was really tired. She said he was brilliant, but lived in his own world, that he probably didn't even know I existed because she never told him she was pregnant." Maxwell nodded, encouraging him to continue. "She said she met him when she was doing document review for some big corporate merger, that he was important, some kind of financial genius working for one of the companies. They only dated for a few months before he moved overseas for work." Oliver's voice grew quieter. "She kept a photo of him, but I never saw it. She said looking at it made her sad." Maxwell felt a strange, prickling sensation at the base of his skull. "Do you remember which merger this was? Or when?" "It was before I was born," Oliver said, "but I remember she called it the Maxwell House deal because she said it was like the coffee, kept her up for days." He looked up with sudden interest. "Hey, that's like your name." Maxwell's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. The Maxwell House deal had been the nickname for his hostile takeover of House Industries in 2012, his first major acquisition. The legal discovery process had been extensive, requiring armies of paralegals working round-the-clock shifts. "Oliver," Maxwell asked, his voice unnaturally calm, "when is your birthday?" "November 15th, 2014, the boy replied. Maxwell did the quick mental calculation. If Caroline Hayes had been involved in the house industry's acquisition and became pregnant then. He studied Oliver's face with new intensity. The sandy blonde hair, the shape of his eyes, the determined set of his jaw. Features that had seemed vaguely familiar from the moment they met, but which Maxwell had attributed to coincidence. "Do you have that photo of your mother? The one you mentioned keeping in your backpack?" Oliver hesitated, then nodded. "I'll get it." Boom. While the boy retrieved his backpack, Maxwell stood motionless by the counter, his mind racing through implications that seemed simultaneously impossible and inevitable. He had dated occasionally after Elizabeth's death, brief, discreet relationships that never progressed beyond a few months. He remembered almost nothing about those years, consumed as he was by building his empire and numbing his grief. Oliver returned and carefully extracted a plastic-wrapped photograph from his backpack. He handled it with reverence, unwrapping it slowly before passing it to Maxwell. The photo showed a smiling woman with kind eyes, her arm around a much younger Oliver. But it wasn't Caroline Hayes that captured Maxwell's attention. It was the background. They were standing in front of a distinctive red doll with a brass knocker shaped like a lion's head. Maxwell recognized it instantly. The entrance to his first New York apartment, the one he'd kept even after his wealth allowed for much grander accommodations. The one where he'd occasionally brought dates when he wanted to escape the public eye. The apartment he'd finally sold in 2015. "There's another picture," Oliver said quietly, pulling out a second photo and unwrapping it with even greater care. "Mom said this was just for me, to know where I came from, but that I shouldn't show it to anyone, because the man in it was private and important." Maxwell's hands trembled slightly as he accepted the second photograph. When he saw it, the breath left his lungs in a rush. It showed a younger version of himself alongside Caroline Hayes, both laughing at some forgotten joke on what appeared to be a rooftop bar. He had no memory of the specific moment, but he recognized his own genuine smile, a rarity in those days, and virtually extinct in the years since. "That's him," Oliver said, watching Maxwell's face closely. "That's my father. Mom said his name was Max." The silence in the penthouse kitchen seemed to stretch for an eternity as Maxwell stared at the photograph. The young woman's face now triggered vague memories, late nights reviewing documents, casual conversations over delivery food, a brief connection during a stressful period that had seemed inconsequential against the backdrop of his ambitions. "Mr. Reid?" Oliver's voice pulled Maxwell back to the present. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Maxwell placed the photographs carefully on the counter, his mind racing to process the implications. The timing matched. The physical resemblance, now that he was looking for it, was unmistakable. The mathematical probability that this boy, this specific boy who had found his wallet, was his biological son, defied all rational explanation. Yet here they were. "Oliver," Maxwell began, his voice uncharacteristically unsteady, "I need to tell you something important, and I'm not entirely sure how to say it." Oliver's expression shifted from concern to wariness. In his short life, important conversations with adults had rarely brought good news. "I think," Maxwell paused, corrected himself, "I believe I may be your father." The words hung in the air between them. Oliver's eyes widened, but he didn't speak, didn't move, as if processing the statement required all his concentration. "The timing aligns," Maxwell continued, forcing himself to speak methodically through the emotional storm building inside him. "I was involved with the acquisition your mother worked on. I dated someone matching your mother's description during that period. And the photograph," he gestured to the image on the counter, "that's undeniably me. But..." Oliver finally found his voice. "But that doesn't make sense. If you're my father, how did I end up homeless while you're..." He gestured at the penthouse surrounding them. Because I didn't know, Maxwell said simply. Your mother never told me about you, and I never followed up with her after our brief relationship ended. The weight of those words, the magnitude of what his casual dismissal had ultimately cost, struck him with physical force. I never knew you existed, Oliver. The boy stared at him, emotions flashing across his face too quickly to read, disbeliefs, anger, hope, suspicion, confusion. If you're my father, Oliver said finally, his voice small but steady, why did you let Mom die? Why didn't you help us when she got sick? You have all this money. The accusation cut deeper than any business rival's attack ever had. I would have helped if I'd known, Maxwell said, the inadequacy of the response burning in his throat. I would have done anything. Oliver looked away, blinking rapidly. Everyone always says that after it's too late. The truth of this statement, its wisdom beyond the boy's years, left Maxwell momentarily speechless. He'd said similar words himself after Elizabeth's death, promising what he would have sacrificed if only he'd had more time. You're right, Maxwell acknowledged. Words after the fact mean little. But we're here now, facing this truth together. And what matters is what we do next. Oliver looked up, challenge in his eyes. What do we do next? It was a question that would have paralyzed the old Maxwell, the man who calculated every move based on risk assessments and potential returns. But sitting across from this child, his child, the path forward seemed suddenly blindingly clear. First, we confirm it medically, Maxwell said decisively. A DNA test will tell us with certainty. I've already scheduled one for tomorrow morning. And if it's true, Oliver asked, vulnerability breaking through his careful facade, if you really are my father. Then, Oliver Hayes, Maxwell said, meeting his son's gaze directly, everything changes. The DNA results took 48 hours, the longest 2 days of Maxwell Reid's life. He cancelled meetings, delegated decisions that would normally have required his personal attention, and worked remotely from the penthouse, unwilling to let Oliver out of his sight. The boy, for his part, maintained a cautious distance, as if afraid to invest emotionally in a connection that might prove false. On the morning the results were due, Maxwell found himself standing in the doorway of the guest room, potentially his son's room, watching Oliver sleep. In slumber, the boy's guarded expression relaxed, revealing the child beneath the survival-hardened exterior. Maxwell was struck by how small he looked against the king-sized bed, how vulnerable, despite his street-smart toughness. His phone vibrated with an incoming email. The DNA results, delivered directly from the lab to his private account. Maxwell stepped into the hallway, his heart pounding as he opened the message. The scientific language and percentages swam before his eyes, but the conclusions stood out in stark clarity. Probability of paternity, 98%. He leaned against the wall, legs suddenly unsteady. Throughout his career, Maxwell had prided himself on emotional control, on making decisions with his head, not his heart. But the surge of feeling that swept through him now defied all containment. Joy, terror, regret, and something deeper, a fierce primal protectiveness he'd never experienced before, collided within him like opposing weather systems. When he regained his composure, Maxwell returned to find Oliver awake and watching him from the doorway. It's true, isn't it? The boy asked quietly. I can tell by your face. Maxwell nodded, holding out his phone with the results displayed. Yes, I am your father, Oliver. Something shifted in Oliver's expression, a softening around the eyes, a vulnerability he'd kept carefully hidden until now. What happens to me now? Maxwell crossed the room and knelt to meet Oliver at eye level, a posture he hadn't assumed with anyone since Elizabeth's final days. That depends partly on what you want. Legally, there will be processes. I'll need to establish paternity officially, address the issues with social services, potentially seek custody. He paused, realizing he was falling into his familiar pattern of clinical analysis rather than addressing the human question at the core of Oliver's concern. "But what I want," Maxwell continued, his voice gentler, "is for you to stay, to live here with me, to be my son, not just biologically, but in every way that matters." Oliver's expression remained guarded. "Because you feel guilty?" "Because you are my son," Maxwell replied simply. "Because finding you has awakened something in me I thought died with your stepmother 15 years ago. And because, quite frankly, you're the most remarkable person I've met in decades." A smile flickered briefly across Oliver's face before skepticism reasserted itself. "What if I'm not what you expected in a son? I'm not good at fancy schools or business stuff." "Oliver," Maxwell said, the certainty in his voice surprising even himself, "you returned $50,000 when you were hungry and homeless. You've survived challenges that would break most adults. You have more integrity and courage than most of the executives in my company." He met his son's eyes directly. "I couldn't be prouder of the person you already are." For the first time since they'd met, Oliver's carefully maintained composure crumbled completely. The tears he'd held back through months of hardship and loss finally broke free, and before Maxwell could react, the boy had thrown himself forward into his father's arms. The weeks that followed passed in a whirlwind of legal proceedings, medical appointments, and cautious adjustment as father and son navigated their new reality. Maxwell attacked the bureaucratic challenges with the same ruthless efficiency he applied to business acquisitions, hiring the best family law attorneys, expediting DNA certification, and leveraging his considerable influence to cut through red tape that would have stymied most parents. Social services, initially skeptical of the situation, gradually yielded to the overwhelming evidence and Maxwell's unwavering determination. The caseworker assigned to Oliver's file, a veteran of the system who had seen too many children failed by adults who promised to care, maintained her professional reserve until the day she witnessed Maxwell abruptly leave a billion-dollar negotiation because Oliver had called from school with a fever. "In 20 years of child welfare work," she told Maxwell later, "I've rarely seen that level of prioritization from a biological parent, let alone one who's only known their child for a month." But for all his external progress, Maxwell found himself facing an internal reckoning more challenging than any corporate takeover. Parenthood demanded vulnerability, patience, and emotional availability, qualities he had deliberately excised from his professional persona. The walls built over 15 years of isolated success couldn't be dismantled overnight, no matter how sincerely he wished to connect with his son. For Oliver's part, years of self-reliance and disappointment had left their mark. He accepted his father's material provisions with lingering disbelief, but held his emotional trust in reserve. Nightmares frequently woke him, leaving him trembling and disoriented in his luxurious bedroom. On those nights, Maxwell would sit beside him until he fell back asleep, neither of them acknowledging the significance of these quiet vigils come morning. 2 months after Oliver's arrival, Maxwell found himself facing an unexpected adversary, the prestigious Westmore Academy's admissions committee, who had rejected Oliver's application despite Maxwell's substantial donations to their endowment. "Mr. Reid," the headmaster explained with practiced diplomacy during a tense meeting in his oak-paneled office, "while we appreciate your generous support of Westmore, our academic standards remain non-negotiable. Oliver's educational gaps are simply too substantial for our curriculum." Maxwell had prepared himself for many battles on Oliver's behalf, but the suggestion that his son was somehow inadequate ignited a protective fury that surprised even him. "My son," Maxwell said, his voice dangerously quiet, "taught himself to read using discarded newspapers. He maintained perfect attendance at public school until his mother's illness made homelessness their reality. He survived challenges that would crush most of your faculty, let alone your student body. He leaned forward, eyes locked with the headmaster's. Oliver doesn't need Westmore. Westmore needs students like Oliver, children with actual character and resilience, not just pedigrees and privilege. That evening, Maxwell returned to the penthouse to find Oliver at the dining table, surrounded by books and worksheets from the tutor who had been helping him catch up academically. The boy looked up expectantly. So, did they say yes? Maxwell hesitated. Throughout his career, he had wielded the truth strategically, revealing only what served his purposes. But with his son, he found himself increasingly committed to transparency, even when uncomfortable. No, he admitted, setting his briefcase down. They didn't. Oliver's face fell momentarily before he shrugged, with practiced nonchalance. It's okay. I probably wouldn't fit in there anyway. Too fancy. Maxwell sat down across from him. There are other schools, better ones where students are valued for their character and potential, not just their test scores or family connections. Or I could just go back to public school, Oliver suggested. I don't need special treatment. Maxwell studied his son's expression, recognizing the complex mix of pride and fear beneath his casual suggestion. Is that what you want? To return to your old school? Oliver picked at the corner of his worksheet. Maybe. At least there I'd just be normal, not Maxwell Reid's surprise kid that everyone's talking about. The newspapers had indeed been relentless since the story broke. Billionaire discovers homeless son. Reid heir found in shelter. From street to penthouse. The Oliver Reid story. Maxwell's legal team had managed to shield Oliver from the worst of the media circus, but they couldn't erase the fundamental public fascination with their situation. I understand wanting normalcy, Maxwell said quietly, but you deserve an education that challenges you and prepares you for whatever future you choose, whether that's following in my footsteps or forging your own path entirely. Oliver looked up, curiosity replacing his earlier dejection. Would you be disappointed if I didn't want to be like you? If I didn't want to run Reid Enterprises someday? The question struck Maxwell with unexpected force. His entire empire had been built with no clear purpose beyond accumulation and expansion. The idea of a legacy, of Oliver potentially inheriting it all, had only recently entered his consciousness. Oliver, he said finally, the only thing that would disappoint me is if you became someone other than yourselves to please me or anyone else. I built my company because it was the path I chose. Your path might be entirely different. Oliver nodded slowly, processing this. I think I might want to help people, like Dr. Chen maybe, or build houses for people who don't have them. Then that's what you'll do, Maxwell said, the certainty in his voice matching any boardroom declaration he'd ever made. And you'll be extraordinary at it. A smile, a genuine one, still rare enough to feel like a victory, spread across Oliver's face. But it faded as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a more solemn expression. Dad? The words still sounded new, tentative on Oliver's lips. Can I ask you something important? Maxwell nodded, his chest tightening at both the question and the address. Oliver had only recently begun calling him Dad, each instance feeling like a precious gift. The money in your wallet, the $50,000. Why do you carry that much cash? Nobody does that. Maxwell hadn't expected this question, though perhaps he should have. His habit of carrying substantial cash was indeed unusual in his circles, where digital transactions and platinum cards were the norm. It was a promise I made, Maxwell said slowly, to your stepmother, Elizabeth. Oliver leaned forward, instantly attentive. Maxwell rarely spoke of Elizabeth, though her photograph remained on his nightstand. When we were first married, we were nowhere near as wealthy as I am now, Maxwell continued. I was building my first company, working impossible hours, leveraging everything we had. One night, we had a fight because I'd forgotten her birthday while closing a deal. The memory was still sharp enough to sting. Elizabeth's hurt expression, his own defensive pride. She told me I was losing sight of what mattered, that I was becoming so focused on chasing wealth that I'd forgotten why I wanted it in the first place. Maxwell's voice softened. She was right. So I made her a promise. I would always carry enough cash to walk away from any deal, any business, any meeting that would hurt what truly mattered. Enough to get us anywhere we needed to go if everything else failed. $50,000, Oliver said quietly. Maxwell nodded. It started as $5,000, all I could spare then. As my wealth grew, so did the amount. But the purpose remained the same, a constant reminder that some things are more important than business. His voice faltered slightly. I kept the habit after she died, though I forgot the lesson behind it. Until you found my wallet. 6 months after Oliver returned his wallet, Maxwell Reid stood at the back of an auditorium, watching with barely contained pride, as his son received an Academic Achievement Award at Brookfield Academy, the progressive school they had chosen together after the Westmore rejection. Unlike Westmore's emphasis on legacy and tradition, Brookfield valued innovation and character development, providing Oliver with both academic support and emotional nurturing. He's made remarkable progress, Oliver's advisor commented, joining Maxwell at the back of the room as applause filled the space. Academically, he's nearly caught up to grade level in most subjects, and his problem-solving abilities are off the charts. But more importantly, he's beginning to trust the community here. That's no small feat for a child who's experienced such instability. Maxwell nodded, his eyes never leaving his son, who was now shaking hands with the school principal. He's the strongest person I know. Children are remarkably resilient, the advisor agreed, but they still need secure foundations. She gave Maxwell an appraising look. You've provided that remarkably well for someone who became a father so unexpectedly. The word father still triggered a complex emotional response in Maxwell, equal parts terror and profound gratitude. Fatherhood had transformed him more thoroughly than any other role in his life, demanding authenticity in place of strategic calculation, patience instead of decisive action, and vulnerability rather than impenetrable strength. After the ceremony, Oliver bounded over, award certificate clutched in one hand. Did you see? Ms. Abernathy said my science project was the most innovative in the class. I saw, Maxwell confirmed, unable to suppress his smile. Your water filtration system was brilliant. Oliver beamed at the praise, then glanced at his watch, a simple Timex rather than the luxury brands Maxwell wore. Are we still meeting Dr. Chen for lunch? You said you had important news. We are, Maxwell confirmed. Let's go. The restaurant Maxwell had chosen was quiet and discreet, one of the few places in Manhattan where he could dine without constant interruption from business associates or society photographers. Dr. Chen was already seated at their regular corner table when they arrived. There are my favorite Reids, she greeted them warmly. Over the months, she had become more than Oliver's physician. She was a trusted advisor and friend to both father and son. Congratulations on your award, Oliver. That's quite an achievement. Thanks, Oliver grinned, sliding into his seat. Dad said you guys have something important to tell me? Maxwell exchanged a glance with Dr. Chen, then turned to his son. We do. It's about the Reid Foundation. The Reid Foundation had been established 15 years earlier, after Elizabeth's death. Initially focused on cancer research, it had operated largely as a tax strategy, managed by accountants who distributed funds according to mathematical formulas rather than passion or purpose. As you know, Maxwell continued, I've been re-evaluating the Foundation's mission and focus, and after much consideration, I've decided to redirect its primary efforts toward two areas. medical care for underserved communities, and transitional housing for homeless families. Oliver's eyes widened. Really? Really, Maxwell confirmed. Dr. Chen has agreed to serve as the medical director, overseeing the establishment of free clinics in neighborhoods with limited healthcare access. Starting with the area where you and your mother lived, Dr. Chen added gently. Oliver swallowed hard, emotion flickering across his face. Mom would have loved that. She always said if we ever got rich, she'd make sure everyone could see a doctor when they needed one. There's more, Maxwell continued. The foundation will also be establishing the Caroline Hayes Transitional Housing Program, providing temporary homes and support services for families in crisis, particularly single parents and their children. Oliver's breath caught audibly. You named it after Mom? It seemed appropriate, Maxwell said softly. From what you've told me about her, Caroline was determined, resourceful, and deeply committed to your well-being despite impossible circumstances. Those are exactly the qualities the program aims to support in other parents facing similar challenges. Oliver blinked rapidly, fighting tears. Over the months, he had slowly shared more stories about his mother, her humor, her determination, the small rituals she had maintained even as their circumstances deteriorated. Maxwell had come to respect Caroline Hayes deeply, and to regret that he had missed the opportunity to know her as more than a brief encounter. There's one more thing, Maxwell added. The Foundation's board has an opening, and we need someone with first-hand experience of the issues we're addressing, someone with unique insight and perspective. Oliver looked between his father and Dr. Chen, confusion evident. Who? You, Maxwell said simply. If you're willing. You'd be the youngest board member by about 30 years, but I can't think of anyone better qualified to help us understand what families actually need during housing transitions. Oliver stared at him in disbelief. Me? But I'm just a kid. I don't know anything about running foundations or businesses. You know what it's like to sleep in subway stations, Maxwell countered. To worry about your next meal. To lose your home and your sense of security. That knowledge is more valuable than an MBA or 20 years of corporate experience. Your perspective would keep us honest, Dr. Chen added. Help us create programs that actually work for the people who need them, not just ones that look good on paper. Oliver fell silent, considering this. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. I'd want to talk to other kids too, not just decide things myself. Maybe we could have a youth advisory committee with other kids who've been homeless or in foster care. Maxwell and Dr. Chen exchanged surprised glances. That, Maxwell said, is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need. A youth advisory committee is brilliant, Oliver. Pride swelled in his chest, not just for his son's compassion, but for his practical wisdom. Then I'll do it, Oliver decided, sitting up straighter. For Mom, and for the other kids who don't have someone to help them like I found you. As they continued their lunch, discussing ideas for the Foundation's new initiatives, Maxwell found himself reflecting on the extraordinary chain of events that had led to this moment. A lost wallet, a boy's integrity, a photograph preserved through months of hardship, coincidences that seemed in retrospect almost deliberately orchestrated. For a man who had built his fortune on calculated risk and strategic planning, the random chance that had reunited him with his son defied all probability. Yet here they were, her father and son, building something together that transcended wealth and status. The Caroline Hayes Transitional Housing Program would launch in 3 months, providing homes for 20 families initially, with plans to expand to 100 within the first year. The first free clinic would open its doors even sooner, offering medical care in the same neighborhood where Caroline had fought so hard to protect her son. None of this would bring Caroline back. Nothing could reclaim the years Maxwell had lost with Oliver. But as he watched his son animatedly describing his vision for the Youth Advisory Committee, Maxwell felt a sense of purpose that had eluded him since Elizabeth's death. The empire he had built, the towers bearing his name, the billions in his accounts, had never filled the void her loss had created. But the boy across the table, with her photos safely preserved in his backpack, had accomplished what no amount of wealth ever could. 1 year to the day after Oliver had returned his wallet, Maxwell Reid stood at the podium in front of the newly completed Caroline Hayes Center, a modern 6-story building in Queens that housed both transitional apartments for families in crisis and a state-of-the-art medical clinic on its ground floor. Behind him sat Oliver, looking both nervous and proud in his first custom suit, alongside Dr. Chen and the Foundation's expanded board of directors. "Today," Maxwell began, addressing the gathered crowd of community members, press, and business associates, "we're not just opening a building, we're honoring a promise, one made by a remarkable woman to her son that she would keep him safe, and one I've made to continue her legacy of protection and care." The journalists in attendance shifted eagerly in their seats. This was Maxwell Reid, as they had never seen him. The notoriously private, ruthlessly efficient businessman, speaking with uncharacteristic emotion about family and community, rather than acquisitions and profits. "1 year ago, a 10-year-old boy found my wallet containing $50,000 in cash." Maxwell paused, allowing the magnitude of the sum to register with the audience. This boy was homeless. He was hungry. He had every reason and right to keep that money. Instead, he tracked me down and returned it, not for reward or recognition, but because a photograph inside mattered to me, and he understood the value of those connections we can't replace. Maxwell gestured to Oliver, who ducked his head slightly at the attention but maintained his composure. "That boy, as many of you now know, turned out to be my son, a child I didn't know existed until that moment. Our reunion could be dismissed as extraordinary coincidence or remarkable luck, but I've come to see it as something more profound, a reminder that what truly matters in life is rarely what we spend our days pursuing." In the audience, several of Maxwell's longtime business associates exchanged surprised glances. This was not the calculating corporate predator they had come to expect at public events. The Caroline Hayes Center represents a new direction for the Reid Foundation and for Reid Enterprises as a whole, Maxwell continued. "We're committing not just to housing families in crisis, but to fundamentally reimagining how corporate resources can address community needs." He outlined the center's innovative approach: 12-month transitional housing combined with job training, childcare, medical services, and ongoing support even after families move to permanent housing. This model was developed with direct input from individuals who have experienced homelessness themselves, including our Youth Advisory Committee, chaired by my son. At the mention of his role, Oliver sat up straighter, a small smile breaking through his serious expression. "Over the next 5 years, the Reid Foundation will establish similar centers in 12 additional cities across the country," Maxwell announced, triggering a murmur of surprise among the business reporters. Additionally, Reid Enterprises is implementing a new hiring initiative specifically focused on parents re-entering the workforce after housing or economic crises. As Maxwell concluded his formal remarks, he gestured for Oliver to join him at the podium. The boy, nearly a foot taller than when they'd first met, thanks to proper nutrition and medical care, stepped forward with growing confidence. "I'd like to invite my son to cut the ribbon and officially open the Caroline Hayes Center," Maxwell said, pride evident in his voice. Together, father and son approached the ceremonial ribbons stretched across the center's entrance. As cameras flashed around them, Maxwell handed Oliver the oversized scissors. "Your mother would be so proud of you," he said quietly, for Oliver's ears alone. "As am I." Oliver nodded, his eyes briefly shining with unshed tears, before he composed himself and cut the ribbon with one clean snip. Applause erupted from the crowd as the doors to the center officially opened. Hours later, after the guests had departed and the press had filed their stories, Maxwell and Oliver walked through the quiet building together. The transitional apartments, each thoughtfully designed to provide both privacy and dignity, would welcome their first families the following week. The medical clinic would begin seeing patients on Monday. "It doesn't bring her back," Oliver said softly as they paused by the portrait of Caroline Hayes hanging in the main lobby. "But it helps somehow. Knowing other moms and kids will have what we didn't." Maxwell nodded, resting his hand on his son's shoulder. "That's how we honor the people we've lost. By creating something meaningful from our griefs." They stood in silence for a moment, both reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. After a while, Oliver looked up at his father. "Do you still carry the $50,000? Maxwell smiled. "I do. Some habits are worth keeping, especially when they remind us of important promises. Even though you don't need it anymore, to walk away from deals or whatever." "Perhaps I need the reminder more than ever," Maxwell replied thoughtfully. "Success makes it easy to forget what matters. That wallet you returned, it's my talisman now. A daily reminder of how close I came to missing what's truly valuable." As they left the building, night was falling over the city. Rather than calling for the waiting car, Maxwell suggested they walk for a while through the neighborhood, something the old Maxwell Reid would never have considered. "I've been thinking," Oliver said as they strolled past local businesses and apartment buildings, "about what I want to do when I grow up." "Oh?" Maxwell kept his tone casual, though his interest was immediate. In the year they'd been together, Oliver had mentioned various possible futures, from doctor to architect to, occasionally, businessman. "I think I want to be like both my parents," Oliver said carefully. "Like Mom, helping people directly, being there when they need someone. But also like you, building things that last, that can help more people than just one person could alone." Maxwell felt a tightness in his throat. "That sounds like a worthy ambition." "Maybe I could run the foundation someday," Oliver continued. "After college and stuff. Make it even bigger. Help more families." "I think you'd be extraordinary at that," Maxwell agreed. "The foundation would be lucky to have your leadership." They walked in comfortable silence for another block before Oliver spoke again, his voice holding a hint of mischief. "But first, I have to get through 7th grade math." Maxwell laughed, a genuine, unrestrained sound that would have shocked his business associates. "One step at a time, then." As they turned back toward where their car waited, Maxwell reflected on the profound transformation of his life in a single year. His priorities had shifted. His definition of success had fundamentally changed. The empire he had spent decades building still stood, but its purpose had evolved from monument to means, a tool for creating the change his son envisioned. In returning a wallet, Oliver had given Maxwell far more than he had lost. He had returned a piece of his humanity that had been missing since Elizabeth's death. He had provided not just connection to the future, but redemption for the past. The Caroline Hayes Center was just the beginning. Together, father and son were building a different kind of legacy, one measured not in property holdings or profit margins, but in lives transformed and communities strengthened. "You know," Maxwell said as they approached the car, "I never properly thanked you." Oliver looked up, confused. "For what?" "For returning my wallet that day. For your honesty when dishonesty would have been so much easier." Oliver shrugged, embarrassed by the praise. "I just did what Mom would have wanted. What was right." "Exactly," Maxwell said softly. "And in doing so, you changed everything. For both of us." As their car pulled away from the curb, Maxwell found himself reflecting on the extraordinary chain of circumstances that had brought them together. Whether divine intervention, cosmic coincidence, or simple human decency, the result was the same. A homeless boy had found not just shelter but family, and a billionaire had discovered that his greatest asset had never appeared on any balance sheet. Thank you all for watching this incredible journey of rediscovery and redemption. If this story touched your heart, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What moment from Maxwell and Oliver's story resonated most deeply with you? Do you have suggestions for other stories you'd like us to share? Your engagement helps us continue bringing these powerful human experiences to life. And remember, sometimes the most valuable things we find are the connections we thought were lost forever.